I shot it on a Tuesday night in early November. I want to be specific about that because the day matters to me now in a way it didn't then. November 7th. The first real frost of the season had come down 2 nights before, and the ground in the back pasture was hard enough that my boots didn't sink anymore. I'd been waiting almost 4 years for that shot, and I took it clean. 1 round 30-06 through what I'm going to call the chest because I don't have a better word for the shape that was standing there. The thing went down in a heap that didn't look right, didn't fold the way an animal folds, and then it was quiet, real quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a gunshot in country that doesn't have any neighbors, where the sound just runs out and there's nothing to bounce it back. I stood there in the dark with my rifle still warm, and I thought I'd won. I thought it was over. I thought I'd done something good for my family and my land and the cattle I'd lost over the years. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm telling you now because I don't have anybody else to tell. My wife left for her sisters in Traverse City 6 days ago, and she's not coming back. Not until I figure this out. And I'm not going to figure this out. I know that now. So I'm sitting here in the kitchen with the lights on and the radio playing low, and I'm going to tell you everything. Because somebody needs to know what happens when you do what I did. My land is in Wexford County, Michigan, about 13 miles outside of Wellston, if Wellston means anything to you. It doesn't to most people. It's a gas station, a bar called The Pines, a post office, and a feed store that's only open 3 days a week. The kind of place where if you ask directions to anywhere more than a county away, the guy behind the counter just shrugs and says, he's never been. My great-grandfather Halverson bought the land in 1924, 83 acres of mixed pasture and woodlot, and the family's been on it since. My grandfather ran it, my dad ran it, I run it now. 42 head of beef cattle, a few hogs in the back, and the woodlot that nobody touches because my dad got it in his head, sometime in the 1970s, that the trees in the back 40 were not to be cut, no matter what. No matter the price of timber, no matter how bad the year was. He never gave me a real reason. He just said, the trees stay. And I respected that, because that's what you do. The DOGMAN, and that's what the old-timers around here call it, started showing up in the spring of 2021. I'm going to use that word DOGMAN, because everybody around here knows it, and I don't want to dance around the thing for an hour before I can name it. There was a song some DJ wrote back in 1987 about a beast in the northern Michigan woods, and the song got popular enough that everybody up here in the Manistee area started telling stories. And then the stories piled up the way stories do. And now, if you talk to enough people in this part of the state, almost every other family has a grandfather or an uncle or a neighbor who saw one. I never believed any of it, I'll be straight with you. I thought it was the same thing as Bigfoot tracks in Oregon or chupacabras down in Texas. People see what they want to see, and the woods up here will do strange things to your eyes after dark. That changed for me on April 12th, 2021. I write the date down because I started a notebook about a week after, and I went back and pinned the start of it to that night based on what happened to the calves. I'd had 3 calves born that spring. 2 were doing fine. The third, a little heifer my daughter Becca had already named Penny because she was 8 years old and she names everything, was weak from day 1. I'd been watching her close, bottle feeding her in the morning, keeping her in the small paddock near the house instead of out with the herd. April the 12th, I went out at first light to feed her, and the paddock gate was open. Not broken, not torn off, just open, latched gate, the kind with a metal hook that drops into a loop, and the hook had been lifted up and out, and the gate had been swung wide. Penny was gone. I figured she'd wandered, even though she'd never wandered before, and I spent the morning walking the fence line. I found her about a quarter mile into the woodlot at the edge of the back 40, what was left of her. And I want to describe this clearly because I've thought about it a lot since. She wasn't torn apart. She wasn't eaten. She was set down on her side in a small clearing under a big white pine, and her throat was open in a clean line from one side to the other, like somebody had taken a knife to her. There was almost no blood on the ground around her. There should have been a lot of blood. I'm not a vet, but I've put down livestock before, and I know what bleeding out looks like. The ground was dry, her body was clean, and she'd been arranged with her legs folded under her like a deer that had laid down to sleep. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy named Wes Hagen came out, took some photos, said it looked like a person did it. He used the words ritualistic and cult activity, and asked me if I'd had any trouble with the neighbors. I told him I didn't really have any neighbors, not for 2 miles in any direction, and the closest one, an older woman named Glenda Sturm, was 81 years old and barely got out of her chair. Wes said he'd file a report and let me know if anything came up. Nothing came up. He never called me back. I never called him. That was the first one. Through the summer, things happened the way they happen, which is to say nothing happened that I could really put my finger on. The dog, an old border collie mix named Patch who'd been with me for 9 years, started refusing to go past the south fence line. He'd just sit down at the edge of the pasture and not move, and if I called him, he'd whine, and I'd have to walk back and get him. He'd never done that before. Patch had run that whole 80 acres since he was a puppy. He knew every inch of it, and now there was a line he wouldn't cross. In June, 2 of my barn cats went missing in the same week. That happens sometimes. Coyotes, owls, cars on the road. I didn't think much of it. In July, I found a buck rub on a tree in the woodlot that was wrong. Buck rubs are when a whitetail strips the bark off a tree with his antlers, marking territory. They're usually about chest height on a person, maybe a little lower. This one was at 7 feet, and the marks were too wide for antlers, and the bark had been pulled off in strips, not scraped. I stood there looking at it for a long time. I told myself a bear had done it, a black bear standing up. There are black bears in this part of Michigan, not many, but some. I told myself a bear, even though I knew a bear's claws would have left different marks. The marks on that tree were drawn, not scratched, deliberate, like somebody had run their fingernails down the trunk and dug deep. In August, I started hearing it at night. This is the part where I lose people, usually. When I've tried to tell this story to anybody, and I've only tried twice, both times before I killed it, the part where I describe the sound is the part where they start looking at me different. So I'm going to do my best to tell you what it actually sounded like, and you can do what you want with it. The first time I heard it was around 2 in the morning on August 19th, 2021. I was awake because Patch was whining at the bedroom door. I got up to let him out, figured he needed to go to the bathroom, and the moment I opened the back door, he wouldn't go. He pressed himself against my leg and shook. So I stood there in my robe and listened, and I heard it. Coming from the woodlot, maybe 400 yards out. It started as a kind of moan, low, and I thought at first it was a cow that had gotten into the back pasture and was hurt. But the moan rose. It rose into a register that I've never heard from an animal, not a howl, not a bark. It had something almost human in the middle of it, a quality of voice, like somebody trying to make the sound of a wolf but coming at it from the wrong direction. And then it stopped, dead stopped, in the middle of the rise, like a hand had closed over a throat. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes waiting to hear it again. Patch wouldn't go out. I locked the door and went back to bed and lay awake until the sun came up. My wife slept through the whole thing. She didn't believe me when I told her in the morning. She said it was probably coyotes. There were coyotes up here. I'd shot 2 myself the year before. Coyotes don't make that sound. I let it go. That fall I lost 2 more calves, both the same way. Throat opened, no blood, body arranged neat in a clearing. The second one I found was lying on its side facing east, the way you lay a dead person sometimes, and there was a small stack of stones next to its head. 6 stones, flat ones, balanced one on top of the other in a little tower. Cairn is the word, like hikers build to mark a trail. 6 stones, perfect balance. The top stone no bigger than my thumb. I knocked it over before I could even think about it. Then I sat down in the wet leaves next to that dead calf, and I cried, which I haven't done since my dad's funeral in 2016. I didn't tell anybody about the stones. I told myself I'd imagined them. I went back the next day to check, and where the cairn had been, there were just 6 flat stones scattered on the ground. I didn't know if I'd really seen them stacked or not. The mind does things to you when you find dead animals in the woods. This is how it goes for a long time. Pieces, small wrong things. Patch refusing to cross the south fence, cats disappearing, calves opened up, and the sound, which I started hearing every couple of weeks once I knew to listen for it, always at night, always from the woodlot, and every time, Patch would press himself against the back door and shake. By the spring of 2022, I'd started carrying the rifle when I went out to do chores after dark. I never saw anything. I'd swing a flashlight beam across the tree line, and the trees would be there, and nothing would be moving, and I'd think to myself, what am I doing? I'm a grown man, scared of a sound. I'd put the rifle back in the case, and then, a week later, I'd be doing the same thing again. Becca was 9 that year. She started talking to me about a man she'd seen at the edge of the woods. I want to repeat this part because it's important. She said a man, not a dog, not a monster, a man. She told me one morning at breakfast, just like she was talking about the weather, that she'd seen a tall man standing at the edge of the woodlot looking at the house. She said he was very tall, taller than the doorframe, and he had long hair, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. She said his face was wrong, but she couldn't say how. She said he didn't move, he just looked. And then she got scared and ran inside to tell her mom, but by the time her mom came out, he was gone. My wife had told her she'd imagined it. My wife didn't tell me about it until Becca brought it up at breakfast weeks later. I asked Becca to take me to the spot where she'd seen him. She showed me. It was the south fence line, the same place Patch wouldn't cross. I walked the fence line that afternoon by myself. I found one footprint in the soft dirt next to a low spot where the fence dips toward a drainage. The print was bare, no boot. The toes were long, too long. The print itself was almost 14 inches from heel to longest toe. I measured it with the tape from my truck, 14¼ inches. The arch was high. There was no claw mark in front of the toes the way you'd expect from a bear track. Just toes, like a man's foot but stretched out, exaggerated. The proportions a child might draw if you told them to draw a foot but make it scary. I covered the print with leaves. I don't know why. I think maybe I didn't want my wife to see it. I think I was already starting to understand that this was going to be my problem and nobody else's, and the less anybody around me knew about it, the safer they'd be. That sounds dramatic now. At the time, it just felt practical. I started reading. I'm not much of a reader. I get the Cadillac News once a week, and I read the agriculture sections. But I'm not the kind of person who orders books off the internet. I started anyway. I bought a book about Michigan cryptids. I bought a book about North American folklore. I bought a book called Hunting the Dogman by a guy who claimed to be a researcher in the UP. None of the books were any good. They were all the same kind of breathless stuff. Lots of italics and exclamation points and stories that didn't have any specifics. I threw them out. What I didn't throw out, what I almost did but didn't, was my grandfather's Bible. It had been sitting in a wooden box in the closet of the spare bedroom since my mother died in 2019. Old Bible, the cover was cracked leather, my grandfather's name embossed on the front. Edwin Halverson. He'd been a deacon at the Lutheran Church in Mesick for 40 years. I'm going to come back to that Bible later, because what's in it is what made me understand what I'd done. But that summer, I didn't think to look at it. The summer of 2022, I started seeing it myself. The first time, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye while I was running fence wire along the south line. I turned my head and saw something tall standing maybe 60 yards back in the trees. Just standing. I had a moment where my eyes wouldn't focus on it, like the shape kept sliding away from the center of my vision. And then it took one step backward into deeper shadow and was gone. I didn't move for about a minute. Then I walked toward where it had been. The leaves were disturbed in a single small patch, like someone had been standing on one spot for a long time and shifted their weight. There was no smell. There were no tracks I could read on the leaf litter. The second time, 2 weeks later, I saw it across the back pasture at dusk. I was bringing the herd in. It was at the far end, maybe 200 yards out, at the edge of the woods, standing upright. The herd had stopped moving. All 42 head were facing that direction with their ears up, very still, the way cattle do when they're nervous and don't know which way to run. I had the rifle in the truck. I started walking toward the truck slow, watching, and the shape watched me back. I don't know how I knew it was watching me, because I couldn't see its eyes at that distance, but you know when a thing is looking at you. By the time I got to the truck and pulled the rifle out, it was gone. The cattle started moving again. I drove them in. I locked them in the barn that night instead of leaving them in the pasture. I started sleeping with the rifle next to the bed. The third sighting was the one that broke something in me. It was October. Becca was at her grandmother's for the weekend, which was lucky. My wife was at the grocery store in Cadillac. I was alone in the house. I was washing dishes. The kitchen window over the sink looks out across the front yard toward the dirt road, with the woodlot off to the right side. I looked up from the sink and it was standing at the edge of the yard, maybe 40 feet from the house. I want to describe what I saw because this was the first time I saw it in daylight. Clear, no shadows, no peripheral vision tricks. It was tall, 7.5 feet, maybe 8. The proportions of it were not right for a person and not right for an animal. The legs were long, the knees bent backward the way a dog's knees bend, but it was standing upright. The arms hung at its sides and the hands had fingers, long fingers with nails that looked black. The body was covered in coarse dark fur, but not evenly. The chest and the belly had less fur. The skin underneath was a gray color, like the skin of an elephant. The head was the worst. The head was shaped like a dog's head, long muzzle, ears set high, but the eyes were wrong. The eyes were set forward in the skull, the way a person's eyes are, not on the sides the way a wolf's eyes are. And the eyes were brown, warm brown, human brown. And it was looking at me through the kitchen window. It didn't move. I didn't move. We stood there for what I'm going to call a minute, because that's what it felt like, but it might have been 10 seconds. I felt my bladder release. Just a little. Embarrassing thing to admit. I'm a grown man, and a thing in my yard made me wet myself. And then it turned its head and looked toward the road. Slow, deliberate. Like it had heard something. I followed its gaze and I could see down the road that my wife's car was coming. You could see the dust trail from a quarter-mile out. When I looked back at the yard, it was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. The yard was empty, the woodlot was still, and my wife pulled in 2 minutes later with the groceries, and I went out to help her carry them in like nothing had happened. I went to the bathroom and changed my pants before she came inside. I never told her. That night I sat in the kitchen after she went to bed, and I made a decision. I was going to kill it. I was going to kill it because it had come up to my house in daylight and looked at me through my own window, and because if it could do that, it could come up to my house when Becca was alone in her room, and there was no version of this where I was going to let that happen. The decision part was easy, the doing of it was hard. I want to be honest about how long it took, because the impression I might be giving is that I was some kind of focused hunter, that I went out the next week and tracked it down. That's not how it went. It took me almost 2 more years. 2 years of stand hunting, of bait piles, of game cameras, of nights sitting in the cold with my breath fogging in front of my face, watching empty woods. 2 years where I lost 3 more calves, where my wife asked me twice if I was having a breakdown, where Becca turned 11 and started spending more time at her friend's house in town and less at home, which I encouraged because I wanted her away from the property. The DOGMAN, and I'm going to keep calling it that, learned. That's the part nobody who hasn't done this would understand. It learned. It saw my game cameras and it started moving around them. I'd find them turned to face a different direction in the morning, the angle adjusted just slightly so they were pointing at empty sky. It saw my bait piles, deer carcasses I'd put out hoping to draw it in, and it wouldn't touch them. It saw my stand on the south fence, and after the second time I'd sat in that stand, it stopped coming anywhere near it. I'd move the stand, and 3 weeks later, same thing. I'd track it the next morning, walking the fence line, looking for prints. I'd find them sometimes, always the same. The big bear track with the long toes. Once I found a place where it had been crouching for what looked like hours, the leaves pressed down in a single shape that was kneeling, not sitting, and I sat in that exact spot and looked back toward my house and realized I was looking at Becca's bedroom window. That night, I moved Becca's bed to the other side of the room. I told her it was for better light in the morning. I'm not sure she believed me. I'd been going to the Pines once a week through that period because I couldn't be in the house anymore. My wife thought I was drinking. I wasn't drinking much. I was sitting in a booth in the back corner where I could see the door and nursing the same beer for 2 hours, watching the men come and go, wondering which one of them, if any, had a story like mine that they'd never told. An old man started sitting at the bar around then. He'd come in maybe once a month, white hair, walked with a cane, ate alone at the bar with a bowl of soup and a coffee. I didn't know him. He didn't know me either, not that I was aware of. He had to be 85 if he was a day. And one night in February of 2023, he got off his stool and walked over to my booth and sat down across from me without asking. He looked at me for a while before he spoke. Watery blue eyes, almost colorless. "You're Edwin Halverson's grandson." Not a question, I nodded. "I baptized your father." I asked him who he was. "Vance Holm," he told me. The name meant nothing to me. He'd been retired from the church in Messick since 1991. Lutheran, the same church my grandfather had been a deacon at for 40 years. He drank his coffee and looked at me over the rim of the cup. "Your grandfather and I had an arrangement. Some things I knew and didn't tell. I'm not going to tell you them now. You wouldn't believe me, but I'll tell you one thing, and I want you to listen. There are pieces of land in this county that have been promised to things older than the church. Your grandfather knew what he was holding. Your father knew enough to keep his head down. I don't know what you know, but whatever you think is on your land, leave it be." I asked him what he meant. "Leave it be." He repeated it. Then he reached across the table and put his hand on my wrist, and his hand was very cold even though we were inside in the heat. "Whatever's at the back of your land was put there by people who knew more than we do. They left a guard. The guard isn't the problem. The guard is the answer. Do you understand?" I didn't. I told him a little, not much, about the dog refusing to cross the south fence, about the calves with their throats open. He listened. He didn't seem surprised. When I was done, he spoke very quietly. "Then it's already started to look at you. I'm sorry. I should have come to you sooner. Your grandfather wanted to teach you when you were old enough. He passed before you were old enough. That was my fault and his." He stood up. He put a $5 bill on the table for his coffee, which was too much. "Don't kill it, son. Whatever you do, don't kill it. The land doesn't survive without it." Then he walked out. I never saw him again. I asked around about him in the next few weeks. People at the bar knew his name, but not where he lived. I drove to the church in Messick once and asked about him, and the secretary there told me Vance Holm had been found dead in his living room on the morning of March 15th, 2023. Natural causes. He'd been 87. He'd been retired 32 years. They were going to have a small service for him. I didn't go. The reason I didn't go is because I was burying my dog the same morning. Patch died on the night of March 14th, the day before Vance home. I want to tell you how, because it matters. I came out at 6 to feed and he wasn't on the porch where he slept. And that was the first wrong thing because Patch was always on the porch. I called for him. Nothing. I walked the property line and I found him at the south fence, the line he wouldn't cross, laid out on his side in the grass on the safe side of the wire. He was already cold. He hadn't been hit by anything. There were no marks on him. His eyes were open and his teeth were bared a little, like he died mid-snarl. He'd been a healthy 9-year-old border collie mix the night before. He'd eaten his dinner and gone out to the porch, and the next morning, he was dead at the south fence with his teeth bared. There were 3 small stones next to his head. I didn't see them at first because I wasn't looking. I noticed them when I bent down to pick him up. River stones, smooth, flat. I didn't stack them. I just looked at them lying there in the grass next to my dog. I told myself out loud while I picked Patch up and carried him to the barn that the stones had been there before, that I was just noticing them now because of the dog. I buried him in the backyard. I never told my wife about the stones. I think now, telling you this almost 2 years later, that Patch died of fear, or of something worse than fear. Something old that came up to the fence and looked at him and said his time. Patch was the only one in the house besides me who knew the DOGMAN was real, and Patch had known about it for 2 years longer than I had, and Patch never crossed the south fence, and that line was the only thing that had kept him alive. The night he died, something had crossed the line, not to kill him, just to come close, and the closeness of it had stopped his heart. The day after Vance Holm died, I drove back out to the Pines and sat in the same booth where he'd sat across from me, and I thought about what he'd told me. I thought about the cold of his hand on my wrist. I thought about him going home that night, an old man in a small house in Messick, knowing he had failed, knowing my grandfather had failed, knowing I was going to do exactly what they had both spent years trying to prevent. And I thought about him dying alone the morning after my dog died at the south fence. I didn't think the two things were unrelated. I don't think so now. I think Vance Holm was the last person alive in this county who knew the arrangement, and when he was gone, there wasn't anyone left who could stop me. I kept hunting. Of course I did. I had been told to leave it alone by an old man I didn't know, in a bar, and my dog had died, and I told myself both of those things were coincidences. I kept hunting. There was one night in August of 2023 I should tell you about, because I think about it now. I'd seen the DOGMAN from my stand on the south fence at dusk, a brief shape moving between trees, and I'd come down out of the stand to follow. I had the rifle and the thermal monocular and a flashlight, and I started tracking deeper into the woodlot than I'd ever gone. The DOGMAN moved ahead of me, just inside the limit of the thermal's range, never quite letting me close the distance. It would stop when I stopped. It would move when I moved. I went after it for almost an hour. The thing is, I started to feel different the deeper I went. The air in the back 40 changed. The trees were taller back there, hemlocks and white pine that had been standing since before my family bought the place. The light from my flashlight didn't reach as far as it should have. The ground felt different under my boots, packed harder, almost smooth and warm in patches. I was about 100 yards from the back property line when I stopped, because some part of me, some part I don't have a word for, told me to stop. The DOGMAN stopped too. I could see the heat signature through the thermal, maybe 40 yards ahead. Standing perfectly still in a clearing, I could just barely make out through the trees. It was waiting for me, and in that moment, I understood that I was being led. The DOGMAN wasn't running from me. It wasn't trying to escape me. It was bringing me somewhere it wanted me to go. I turned around and walked back to the house. It took me almost 2 hours to find my way out. I'd lost my bearings going in. When I finally broke out of the woodlot at the south fence, the moon was up and my hands were shaking and I was soaked in sweat even though the night was cool. I sat in the kitchen until dawn with the rifle across my knees, and I didn't drink anything, and I didn't sleep. I know now where it was leading me. It was leading me to the stone, the bear circle. The place I would eventually find on my own, the morning after I killed it. The keeper wanted me to see what it was guarding, wanted me to understand, and I'd refused to go. I'd turned around because some old animal part of me knew that whatever was at the end of that walk wasn't something I was ready to look at. I think now if I had let it bring me there, if I had stood at the edge of the bear circle with the keeper standing next to me in the dark and seen the stone and felt what it felt like to be in that place, I might not have killed him. I might have understood, but I turned around. And 5 months later, I bought the calf. I started reading my grandfather's Bible. I'd run out of other things to try. I knew my grandfather had been religious in a way my father never was, in a way I never was, And I remembered him telling me once when I was small that the woods at the back of our property were old, and that old places remembered things. I didn't know what he meant at the time. I started looking through his Bible for anything he'd marked. He'd marked a lot. The whole book was full of his handwriting in the margins, his notes, his cross-references. Most of it was sermon stuff, doctrinal stuff. Not what I was looking for. But in the back of the Bible, tucked into a pocket in the back cover, there was a folded piece of paper, handwritten. My grandfather's handwriting. The paper was old, brown at the edges. It said this: "The watchers are still here. The seal at the back of our land is from the time before. Do not cut the trees, do not break the ground. The keeper walks the perimeter. Leave it be." I read that paper 4 times. Then I put it back in the Bible, and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. And I thought about my dad, who'd never let anybody cut the back 40, who'd never given a reason, who just said the trees stay. And I thought about my grandfather, and I thought about the DOGMAN, and the way it walked the perimeter of my land, and the cairns of stones, and the way Patch wouldn't cross the south fence, and the bare footprints that weren't quite human. By the fall of 2024, I'd been after the thing for over 3 years. I'd lost something like 7 calves total, 2 cats, the dog had died, and my wife had stopped asking me about the rifle by the bed because she'd stopped asking me about anything. We were married in a technical sense. She lived in the house. We ate dinner together when I came in from chores. She slept on her side of the bed, and I slept on mine. That's a marriage in some ways, and not in others. And I'm not going to get into all of that here because it's not what you came for. What changed in October of 2024, what finally gave me the opportunity I'd been waiting for, was the bear bait. Bear season in Michigan runs in the fall. You can bait bears in certain zones. I'd never hunted bear, but I had a buddy named Don Beasley over in Lake County who did, and he was telling me one night at the Pines about how he'd set up a permanent bait station back in his woods. Sweet stuff mostly, donuts and bread and bacon grease. And he'd built a tree stand 60 yards off, and he'd been pulling a bear off it almost every year for a decade. Don was a couple beers in, and he was talking about how the trick was that the bear got used to the bait, started coming on a schedule, and once it was on a schedule, you owned it. I thought about that for 2 weeks. The dogman would not come to my bait piles. I'd tried deer carcasses, I'd tried fresh meat. I'd tried gut piles after I shot a doe that fall. Nothing. It wouldn't eat what I put out. But I started thinking about the cattle. It had killed calves and it had not eaten them. It had just opened them up and arranged them. Whatever it was doing with the cattle wasn't about food. So if it wasn't about food, what was it about? I was reading my grandfather's notes again that month. I'd started keeping them on the kitchen table where I could go back to them when I was alone in the evenings. And one of his notes in the margin of Genesis chapter 6 said this: "The blood seal, the line is held in blood. They remember the old covenants and they walk where the blood is." I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, not entirely. But I read it and I read it again, and I started to wonder if what the dogman was doing with the calves was a kind of marking, a kind of patrol that involved leaving signs, the opened throats, the lack of blood on the ground, the arrangement. If that was true, then the dogman didn't just respond to food, it responded to blood, and specifically maybe to the blood of a calf. I bought a calf. October 28th. I bought a weaned heifer calf from a Mennonite family in Marion who was selling off for the winter. $240 cash. I drove her back in the bed of my truck. I didn't tell my wife I'd bought her. I put her in the small paddock by the barn, the same one Penny had been in 3 years before. I left the gate open that night. I had a stand set up in the woodlot, a permanent one I'd built that spring. I'd built it specifically with this in mind. It was tucked into the crotch of 3 oaks at the edge of a small clearing, and the clearing was at the far side of the woodlot, about 300 yards into the timber, the deepest part of my 80 acres. From the stand, I had a clear shot to a spot maybe 40 yards out, where I'd cleared away brush and put down a small bed of cedar shavings, an arranged bed, neat, like somebody might lay out a sleeping mat. I'd been refreshing the cedar shavings every week for 2 months, just to keep the spot fresh, so it would be there when I needed it. On the night of November 6th, I walked the calf on a halter rope from the paddock to the cedar bed in the clearing. The calf didn't want to come. They never do when they smell what's in those woods. I had to drag her the last 100 yards. I tied her halter to a small stake I'd driven into the ground, and I cut her throat with my hunting knife. I want you to know that I cried doing that. I'm not proud of it. The calf was 11 months old. She had soft eyes and she was warm, and she trusted me up until the last second. I held her head, and I cut her throat, and I held her down until her legs stopped kicking, and I bled her out onto the cedar shavings. I did it because I thought I was going to save my family. I'm telling you that. not to make myself sound better, but because it's true. Then I climbed into the stand. I had the rifle. I had a thermal scope, top of the line, that I had bought after selling some equipment that spring. I had a folding chair, water, a thermos of coffee, and I had every reason in the world to believe that the dogman would come. It came at 1:47 in the morning. The thermal scope showed me a shape moving through the trees from the south, low to the ground at first, then rising up onto its hind legs as it got closer to the clearing. It came in slow, careful. It stopped at the edge of the clearing and stood there for almost 10 minutes. I held the rifle on it the whole time. My arms ached. I didn't dare move. Then it walked out into the clearing and went to the calf. It knelt down next to her. The thermal showed the shape clearly now, the proportions I'd seen before, the dog-shaped head, the long arms, the hands. It put one hand on the calf's flank. It just put its hand there. It wasn't going to eat her. I understood this watching through the scope. It was doing something else, some kind of ritual, some kind of acknowledgement. It bowed its head. And in that moment, with its head bowed and its hand on the calf's body, I shot it. The shot took it just below the shoulder, through what I'd called the chest. It dropped. It didn't make a sound. It just went down, one moment kneeling there with its head bowed, the next moment a heap on the ground next to the dead calf. I waited. I waited a long time. I waited maybe 20 minutes in that stand, watching the thermal, making sure nothing moved. Then I climbed down. I walked out to the clearing with my flashlight. The shape was bigger up close than I'd expected, even folded over on itself in the dirt. It was as long as I was tall. I poked it with the barrel of the rifle. Nothing. I shined the flashlight on its face. I want to be careful here, because what I saw in that flashlight beam is something I have to remember every day now. The face was not exactly a dog's face up close. The muzzle was shorter than I'd thought. The teeth, when its mouth fell open slightly, were not a dog's teeth. They were too even. They were too small in the front and too large in the back. They were the teeth of a person, if a person had teeth all the way around their mouth. The fur on the face was not fur the way a dog's fur is. It was finer. The hair on a man's arm, but darker and longer. The eyes were closed. I should have left them closed. I knelt next to it and I lifted one of the eyelids with my thumb. I wanted to see, yes, I wanted to know. The eye underneath was brown. It was a human eye. The whites of the eye, the iris, the pupil, all of it. A human eye in the face of a dog. I sat back on my heels and I looked at the thing I had killed and I felt the first crack open up in what I'd thought I was doing. I'd been telling myself for 3 years that I was hunting a monster. The thing in front of me was not a monster. It was something else. It was something that had a face and the face had a person in it. I dragged the body. It took me almost 2 hours. I had to use a chain and a winch on the back of my truck, which I'd driven out to the edge of the woodlot in advance. I got the body into the bed of the truck under a tarp. I drove it back to the barn. I'd built a place in the back of the barn ahead of time, a kind of pit, 8 feet deep, that I'd dug with a small backhoe the summer before. I'd told my wife I was putting in a new septic line. I dumped the body into the pit. It hit the bottom with a sound that wasn't right. Not the sound of an animal hitting the dirt. Heavier, wetter. The kind of sound a sandbag makes if a sandbag had a soul. I stood at the edge of the pit with the body lying 8 feet down in the dark, and I shined the flashlight on its face one more time. The eyes were still closed. The fur was matted with blood and dirt. The mouth had fallen open and I could see the teeth, the human teeth, gleaming up at me. I almost climbed down into the pit and tried to pull it back out. I almost did. I don't know what I would have done if I had. There was no version of this where I was going to bury a thing like that and not feel it watching me from underneath the ground for the rest of my life. I covered it with quicklime instead, 2 50-pound bags. I'd bought them 3 weeks earlier from the feed store and told them I was using them for hog burial, which they accepted without question because that's how things work up here. I poured the lime over the body slowly. The lime hissed when it hit the wet places. The hissing was the worst part of the whole night. The sound of something being broken down at a chemical level by a substance I dumped on it. I covered the lime with dirt, 3 feet of dirt, packed it down with the back of a shovel. Then I climbed up out of the pit and I drove the tractor over it twice. By dawn, there was no sign of anything except a slightly higher patch of dirt in the back of the barn that you'd never notice unless you knew to look. I came back inside the house and I took a shower. The water ran black at first because I was covered in dirt and blood, and then it ran clear. I dressed in clean clothes. I made coffee. My wife came down at 6:30 and asked me how I'd slept, and I said fine. She made breakfast. I ate it. I told her I loved her, which I hadn't said in maybe a month. For the first 3 days after I killed it, the woods were quiet, the way I'd always wanted them to be. No sounds at night, no movement in my peripheral vision. Patch had been gone for over a year, and I missed him, but for the first time since he'd started refusing to cross the south fence, I could walk that fence line and not feel anything at my back. I walked it twice on November 10th, just because I could. The trees seemed normal, the leaves crunched, the light came through the canopy in patches. I stood at the south fence and I looked into the woodlot and I said out loud, to nobody, "It's done." Then I walked back to the house. 3 weeks ago, today. There was a small flat stone sitting on the windowsill outside Becca's bedroom. The window was closed. Becca was upstairs asleep. The stone was on the outside of the windowsill, the part that's about 3 feet off the ground because that side of the house slopes down. I almost didn't see it. It was a small thing, maybe 2 inches across. River stone, polished smooth. I picked it up and turned it over, and it was just a stone. Nothing on it, no writing, no markings, just a stone. I put the stone in my pocket. I didn't tell my wife. I went and did my chores. By the time I came back to the house, I'd decided it was nothing. A kid had thrown it, a bird had carried it. It was a stone. It didn't mean anything. The next morning, November 11th, there were 3 stones. They were stacked, one on top of the other. On the windowsill outside Becca's bedroom, a small cairn, 2 inches tall, 3 flat river stones balanced one on top of the next, the top one no bigger than my thumb. I knocked it over before I could think. Then I stood in the yard and I looked at the woodlot and I felt the cold start to come up through my boots. I went inside and I checked on Becca. She was still asleep. I checked her bedroom window from the inside. It was locked. I checked all the windows. They were all locked. I went out to the barn. I went to the back of the barn, to the place where I'd buried the dogman. The ground was undisturbed. Nothing had been dug up. I knelt down and I put my hand on the dirt, and the dirt was cold and packed and ordinary. I came back inside. I told my wife I was going to take a couple days off, and I started watching the property. The second cairn appeared on Becca's windowsill on November the 13th. I had been awake all night watching. I had a chair in the living room with a view of the south side of the house. I'd put motion sensor lights on every corner. I'd put cameras on the eaves. The cameras showed nothing. The motion lights didn't trigger. And when I walked out at 6 a.m. to check, there were 3 stones on Becca's windowsill, stacked. The cameras showed nothing. I want you to understand what that means. The cameras showed nothing. I checked the footage, hour by hour, nothing. Birds. A possum walking across the driveway at 2 a.m. A barn cat. No human shape. No animal shape. No motion at the south side of the house where the stones appeared. And yet, the stones appeared. I sat in the kitchen at 7 a.m. with the cameras pulled up on my laptop, and I watched the south side of the house from midnight to 6. I watched it 3 times. There was no moment when anything approached that window. No moment. The stones came from nowhere. I stopped sleeping. I would lie in bed with my eyes closed, and I would feel something at the edge of the property, something walking the perimeter, something doing the rounds that the dogman had done for years. I started hearing the sound again at night, the moan that rose into a half howl. But it was different now. It was further away than it used to be. It came from beyond the property line, from the state forest land that bordered my back 40. And there was more than one of them. I want to be careful here. I want to tell you exactly what I heard. The first night I heard the new sound was November 15th, about a week after the kill. I was sitting in the living room with the rifle across my lap and the lights on, and I heard the moan from the woodlot, the same one I'd been hearing for 3 years, the one I thought I'd silenced. It rose and then stopped, dead, like it always had. And then, from further away, from outside my property, another moan rose. Different timbre, lower, older. It rose into that same broken-off howl and stopped. And then a third one, even further out, from the direction of the state forest. And then a fourth. There were at least 4 of them. There may have been more. They were calling to each other across miles. And the closest one, the one in my woodlot, the one in the exact spot where I had been killing it for years, was answering them. I went outside that night. I want to say that was brave, but it wasn't. It was something else. I had reached a point where I needed to know more than I needed to be safe. I walked out of the house with the rifle in my hand and the flashlight off, and I walked to the edge of the woodlot, and I stood at the south fence and I listened. The moaning had stopped by the time I got out there. The woods were quiet again. But I could feel them. I could feel them the way you feel a person standing behind you in a dark room. There were things in those trees, and they were watching me. And they weren't moving, and they weren't going to move, but they were there. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, and then I felt the cold come up from the ground into my boots and into my legs, and I turned around and walked back to the house. When I got back inside, my wife was awake. She was standing in the kitchen in her bathrobe. She'd been crying. She told me she'd had a dream. She'd dreamed that there was a man standing at the foot of our bed. A tall man with long hair and no shirt, and his face was wrong, but she couldn't say how. She told me he had stood there for a long time, and then he had reached out and touched her foot through the blanket, and his hand was very cold. And that's when she woke up. She said her foot was cold under the blanket when she woke. She said she could still feel the spot. She told me something else then, sitting at the kitchen table in her bathrobe at 3 in the morning. She had seen him before, the man at the foot of the bed. She had seen him standing at the edge of the woodlot 2 summers ago, in the long grass at the south fence, watching the house. She had been hanging laundry on the line, and she had looked up, and he was there. A deer at first, she'd thought, because that's what a person tells themselves. Then a hiker, even though we don't get hikers on our land. Then she was tired and seeing things. She had not mentioned it to me because she didn't want to bother me. She knew I was already losing sleep over the cattle. She had thought, in her own way, that if she didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be real. She asked me then if it was real. She looked at me across the table, and her face was very pale, and asked me if she had really seen what she had seen. All those summers, standing at the edge of our property, watching our daughter play in the yard from a distance, never moving any closer, never coming up to the house. She asked me to tell her the truth. I told her yes. It was real. I'd been hunting it for years, and I thought I'd dealt with it. I didn't tell her how. I didn't tell her what I had buried in the barn. One thing was true, and the rest was still mine to carry. She nodded and looked down at her hands on the table for a while. She told me she wanted to take Becca to her sister's in Traverse City for a few days. She wanted to get out of the house. I didn't argue. I packed their things. They left the next morning, November 16th. My wife drove. Becca sat in the passenger seat and waved at me through the window as they pulled out of the driveway. That was 6 days ago. I haven't seen them since. My wife calls every evening. She tells me she had bad dreams again last night. She tells me Becca won't sleep alone. She tells me she's not coming back until I figure out what's wrong with the house. She doesn't know what I did. I haven't told her. I don't know how to tell her. The morning after they left, before the stones started showing up in new places, I went up to Becca's room. I don't know why. I wanted to be near her things. I sat on her bed for a while. Her stuffed animals were arranged on the pillow the way she liked them. The bookshelf I'd built her 4 years ago still had her chapter books and her unicorn coloring books, and the small box she kept her treasures in. I opened the closet to look at her clothes. I'm a grown man. I don't know how to explain it. I wanted to smell her shampoo on the sweaters she'd left behind. And on the floor of the closet under a pile of stuffed animals she'd outgrown, I found a folded piece of paper. I almost didn't open it. It looked like a drawing she'd done and stashed, the way kids do. I unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing. Becca's drawings have a particular style I can recognize from across a room. Bright colors. A clear pencil outline. She always signs her name in the bottom right corner. This one was signed. It was a drawing of a girl with brown hair, holding hands with a tall figure. The tall figure was covered in dark brown crayon, head to foot. The figure had a long muzzle, drawn in profile, pointed ears, a small black eye. The girl in the drawing was smiling. Above the girl, in her child's lettering, Becca had written, "My friend at the window. He says hello sometimes. Don't tell Daddy." The drawing was dated in the corner, June 14th, 2023, a year and a half ago. Becca had been 10. She had been drawing the keeper for over a year. She had been calling him her friend. She had known what he was. She had seen his face. She had understood that I would not want to know, and she had hidden it from me to protect their friendship. I sat on the floor of her closet and held that drawing and cried for a long time. I cried because my daughter had been smarter than me. I cried because the keeper had been kind to her, in some way I would never understand, and I had killed him. I cried because Becca had known and she'd been afraid to tell me. I cried because the new thing, the thing that has Becca's tooth, the thing that stacks stones on her windowsill, is not her friend. It is something else entirely. And whatever bond she had with the keeper, whatever the keeper had been doing at her window when he said hello to her sometimes, is gone now, and what comes to her window now is not the same. I folded the drawing and put it in my coat pocket. It's in there now, next to the deed. That same afternoon, November 17th, the stones started appearing in different places, not just on Becca's windowsill anymore, on the back step, on the hood of my truck, on the railing of the front porch, always 3 stones, always stacked, always perfect, and the cameras still showed nothing. I went to the back of the barn on November 18th and I started digging. I want to be honest with you about what I expected to find. I expected to find the dogman's body. I expected that it had not been killed properly, that it had not stayed dead, that something supernatural had happened, and it had crawled out of the pit and was now stalking my property. I expected when I started digging to find an empty pit, and that empty pit was going to confirm what I was already starting to believe. The body was still there. I dug for about 4 hours. I went down through the lime and through the dirt, and the body was there, exactly where I'd put it, decomposed partially. The quicklime had done what quicklime does, but the body was there. The shape was unmistakable. The long limbs, the dog-shaped skull, the human teeth in the muzzle. I uncovered the head and I looked at the skull and I saw something I had not seen the night I killed it because I'd been too shaken to look closely. There was a scar across its forehead, an old scar. The fur didn't grow there. The skin underneath was puckered, healed over, deep, and the shape of the scar was a line, a clean horizontal line across the brow, like something had been carved into it a long time ago and had healed badly. I'd seen this kind of scar before, in a book my grandfather had kept in his sermon box. I covered the body back up. I went to the house. I went to the closet in the spare bedroom, and I pulled out the cardboard box of my grandfather's sermons and his old books. And at the bottom of that box was the Book of Enoch. The Ethiopian version, my grandfather had labeled the spine, black hardback, gold lettering. A book that's not in most Bibles, that the early church didn't include in the canon, but that some traditions in Africa and the Middle East have kept. My grandfather had owned a copy. He'd marked it up the same way he'd marked up his Bible. There was something else in the box too, underneath the sermons, a leather notebook, thin, about the size of a paperback, handwritten on the front in my grandfather's hand, watching journal. The pages inside were dated. Some entries were short, just a sentence. Some were a paragraph. Some had hand-drawn diagrams. The first entry was dated September 4th, 1968. The last was dated November 12th, 2016, less than a month before he died. I read parts of it that afternoon. I'm going to read you a few of the entries because they matter. September 4th, 1968. Saw him for the first time at the south fence at dusk. Father had told me he would come. Father had told me what to do. I did it. Calf in the small paddock, throat. Cedar shavings in the clearing. The understanding is renewed. October 11th, 1973. Father gone 3 years now. The keeper still walks. The seal holds. I do not see him often. I do not need to. I leave the woodlot alone, and the line is held. April 2nd, 1988. The new generation in town wants the trees cut. The price is too good, they say. I had to tell my son, James. I told him only what he needed to know. He believed me without arguing. He is a good man. He will keep the trees. That entry was about my father, James Halverson. My dad, who never explained why the trees couldn't be cut, just said they stayed. He'd believed without arguing. He'd kept the trees. He'd never told me. There was an entry from December 18th, 2014 that hit me harder than the others. Talked with Vance again. We are old men. Neither of us has long. He worries my grandson will be the one to break it. The boy is not religious. The boy is practical. The boy will not believe. I want to talk with him. Vance says wait until he asks. He will ask. They always do. My grandfather had wanted to teach me. He'd been told by Vance home to wait until I asked. I never asked. He died in 2016. I never asked him a single question about the land. I never asked him anything about the woodlot, or the back 40, or the trees that couldn't be cut. He had waited, and I had never come. And then he was gone. The last entry, November 12th, 2016, 3 weeks before he died, was the shortest. I do not think the boy will ever ask. Pray for the keeper. Pray for the land. Pray for what comes after me. I put the journal down on the kitchen table. I sat there for a long time. I thought about my grandfather, an old man in his last weeks, writing that entry, knowing what was coming, knowing I was who would inherit this and that. I would not be ready. I thought about him praying. I thought about the keeper, the DOGMAN, the thing I had shot through the chest while its head was bowed over the calf I had killed for it. I want to tell you about what's in the Book of Enoch, because the rest of what I have to say depends on it. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a guy who's been reading this book for 3 weeks. But the basics are these. The Book of Enoch tells a story about a group of angels called the Watchers, 200 of them, who came down from heaven in the days before Noah. They were supposed to be guarding humanity. Instead, they fell. They taught humans things they weren't supposed to teach. Metallurgy, sorcery, the making of weapons. They took human wives, and they had children with those human wives. The children were not human. The children were called Nephilim. They were giants. They were the offspring of the Watchers and the daughters of men. God's response in the story was the flood. The flood was, in part, to wipe out the Nephilim. But the Book of Enoch is very clear that the flood didn't get all of them. Some survived. Some were not destroyed. and the watchers themselves, the angels, were bound. Some were chained in the depths, some were imprisoned in places of darkness, but not all of them. The text is murky about this. Some passages suggest that not all the watchers fell, that some remained loyal, and that some were given a different task. The task of keeping the surviving Nephilim in check. I want to read you something. I'm going to read it from my grandfather's copy, because his copy has his notes in the margin. This is from chapter 10, a passage where the archangel Michael is speaking to God. Bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. In the margin next to that passage, in my grandfather's handwriting, it says this: "The keepers walk the line. They are not free. They are not the fallen. They are the ones who watch the others. They do not eat as we eat. They do not speak. They mark with stones. They mark with blood. The land that holds them must not be broken. Our family was given a piece of the line in 1894. The deed is in the box." The deed was in the box. I went and found it. The deed to my family's 83 acres, signed in 1894 by a man named Otto Halverson, who was my great-great-grandfather. The deed had been issued by a Lutheran ministry that I'd never heard of, the Order of St. Bartholomew. The deed had a clause at the bottom that I had never read, because nobody reads the back of an old deed. The clause said this: "The grantor and his successors covenant to preserve in perpetuity the wooded portion of the parcel, and to permit the passage and habitation of the keeper. The breaking of this covenant releases the parcel from its grant and from its protection." The keeper. I sat at the kitchen table with that deed in front of me, and my grandfather's book of Enoch opened to chapter 10, and I started to understand what I had done. The DOGMAN had been the keeper of what I wasn't sure yet, but I started thinking about my back 40, the woodlot, the part of my land my father had said could never be cut. I started thinking about the south fence line, the place where Patch wouldn't cross, the place where I'd found the long footprint. I started thinking about the calves with their throats opened cleanly, the bodies arranged with care, the cairns of stones, marking, patrol, the keeper walking the perimeter of something, and the blood of the calves serving as some kind of renewal of the seal, the way my grandfather's note had said, "The line is held in blood," and I had killed the keeper. I went out to the woodlot that afternoon, November 19th. I walked it the way I'd never walked it before, all the way through, all the way to the very back of my property, to the corner where the back 40 butts up against the state forest land. I'd been to that corner maybe twice in my life. There's no reason to go there. It's deep timber, white pine and hemlock, and the ground is broken up by old glacial deposits, big rocks the size of cars left behind by the ice. Nobody hunts back there. The deer don't go back there. There's no water. I found something in the back corner. I want to describe it the way I saw it, the way I see it now when I close my eyes. There's a clearing back there, maybe 40 feet across, and in the middle of the clearing, there's a stone. One stone, big one, maybe 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, roughly rectangular. It looks like it was placed there, not grown there. It's a different rock than the rocks around it. Granite, maybe. The other stones in the back 40 are sandstone, glacial stones, smooth. This one is hard and angular. There are markings on the stone, carvings. I have no idea what they say. They look like letters, but not in any alphabet I recognize. They look like something between Hebrew and runes. Old. The carvings are weathered, almost smoothed out, but you can still see them if you run your fingers across the stone. Around the stone, in a circle about 10 feet across, the ground is bare. No leaves, no needles, no grass, just dirt. And the dirt is hard, like it's been packed down by something, walking the same circle over and over for a long, long time. I stood at the edge of that bare circle, and I did not step into it. I knew, the way you know things in your gut, that I should not step into that circle. I knew, looking at it, that the bare circle was where the keeper had walked, round and round, for who knows how long, years, decades, maybe longer than that. Maybe my grandfather knew about this stone. Maybe my great-great-grandfather Otto Halverson knew about it, and that was why he'd accepted the deed, with its clause about preserving the woods and permitting the passage of the keeper. I drove the keeper out of his circle the night I killed him. I drove him out with the smell of the calf's blood, and I shot him at the calf's body, and I buried him in lime in the back of the barn. The circle has been empty for 3 weeks. That night, the night of November 19th, was the first time I dreamed about the stone. I dreamed I was standing at the edge of the bare circle, and the stone was glowing very faintly with a light like the inside of a refrigerator at night. And around the stone, at the edge of the bare circle, there were others. Not just one keeper. Several, 6, 7, I don't know. They were standing at the edge of the circle, like I was, looking at the stone. And one of them turned its head and looked at me. And it had a human face. Not a dog face, a human face. A man's face, bearded, with long hair, and his eyes were dark and tired. And he opened his mouth and said something to me in a language I didn't understand, but I understood the feeling of it the way you do in dreams. He was telling me something has been let out. I woke up at 3 a.m. with that sentence in my head. Something has been let out. I went outside. I walked all the way to the back of the woodlot in the dark with a flashlight and the rifle. I walked to the clearing with the stone. I shined the flashlight on the stone. The carvings were still there. The bare ground was still there. The circle was empty. But on the top of the stone, on the flat top of that 4-foot granite block, there was a cairn. 3 flat river stones, balanced, the smallest one on top. I stood there in the woods at 3:30 in the morning, alone, looking at that little stack of stones on top of the old marker, and I understood. Something is back. Something has come back to take the keeper's place. And whatever has come back, it knows where the keeper used to walk, and it knows where the stones get stacked, and it knows about my house and about Becca's window. It knows everything the keeper knew. It just isn't the keeper. I walked back to the house. I sat in the kitchen until dawn. I didn't sleep. I haven't really slept in 5 days. Last night, November 27th, the moan came back. It started in the woodlot, the same way it always had, but it didn't stop the way it always had. It didn't break off in the middle of the rise. It went all the way up. It became a howl, a long, full howl, the kind of sound that I'd been waiting for years to hear, the natural sound that the keeper had never made, because the keeper, I think now, was not allowed to make it. And then, after the howl ended, there was a different sound, a laughing sound, low, slow, not human, not animal, coming from the woodlot, from inside my property. From the bare circle, I think, though I can't be sure. The sound of something amused, the sound of something that had been bound for a long time and is no longer bound, that has stepped out of its circle and is walking on my land, and it is amused. I'm sitting in the kitchen now with the radio on low and the lights on bright. I've called my wife. She didn't answer. I left a message. I told her I love her and I love Becca and I'm sorry, and I asked her to please not come home. Not for a while. Not until I know more. I went back to my grandfather's notes. I went back to the Book of Enoch. I've been reading it all night. There's a passage in chapter 16 that I keep coming back to. It says, "Of the Nephilim, the children of the Watchers, that after their bodies died in the flood, their spirits did not die. The spirits became something else. The spirits became what the text calls evil spirits upon the earth." The text says the spirits will work destruction without being judged, and will not be judged until the day when judgment comes for all. My grandfather wrote in the margin next to that passage, "Bound to the land where they fell, held by the keepers. The keepers are also of mixed blood, but loyal. They do not rest. They walk forever. There's something on my land, something that was bound. The keeper held the seal. The keeper walked the line. The keeper kept it down by some kind of agreement I don't understand and probably never will, written into a deed by people who knew what they were dealing with in 1894. And I killed the keeper because I thought it was a monster. I killed the keeper because he came to my window in daylight, and his face was wrong, and he looked at my daughter. But he never hurt her. I want to think about that for a minute. In 3 years, with all the time he had, with all the chances he had, the keeper never hurt her. He never came in the house. He never touched anyone. The calves were ritual. The cairns were warnings. The footprint near the fence dip was him telling me he was there. He looked through the window because he was watching the house, but he was watching the house, I think now, to see what we were doing, to see if we were going to break the covenant, to see if I was going to come for him. And I came for him. I baited him with a calf, and I shot him while his head was bowed. And whatever has been bound in that bare circle for, I don't know, a century or 1,000 years, is loose now, and it's on my land. And it knows my daughter's window, and it knows how to stack stones, and it laughs in the woods at night. The cairns started showing up again this morning. November 28th. There were 3 of them when I woke up. One on Becca's windowsill, one on the back step, one on the hood of my truck. All 3 were stacked perfectly, and next to the cairn on the back step, there was something else. There was a tooth, small one, a baby tooth. I checked. Becca lost a tooth when she was 8 years old, 3 years ago. We saved it. It was in a small box in her room. I went and looked. The box is empty. I don't know how it got the tooth. I don't know how it got into Becca's room or whether it was ever in the keeper's possession, taken sometime in the years he was watching the house. I don't know what it means that the new thing, the thing that's taken over the bare circle, has Becca's tooth, and put it on my back step this morning. I'm trying to decide what to do. I have a few options. I could leave, I could pack up the truck and drive to Traverse City and tell my wife everything, and we could keep driving south, all the way out of Michigan, all the way to somewhere else. We could try to start over. I have some money saved. I could sell the cattle. But I don't think that's an option. I don't think this thing is bound to the land anymore. I think it's bound to me now, because I'm the one who let it out. And there's a clause in the deed that says, when the covenant is broken, the parcel is released. I broke the covenant. The parcel was the seal. The seal is gone. And the thing that was sealed is following me wherever I go, I think. The other option is to go back to the stone. I've been thinking about this all night. I've been reading my grandfather's notes and the Book of Enoch and the back of the deed, and I keep coming back to one thing. The keeper was of mixed blood, but loyal. He kept the seal. He walked the line. He maintained the covenant for as long as he was alive. He maintained it with blood. With his blood, I think. The calves were a kind of payment, an ongoing tribute, a way of keeping the seal renewed. And the keeper himself was the active component. The keeper was what kept the thing in the ground. There's no keeper now, but maybe a keeper could be appointed. Maybe the covenant could be renewed. Maybe a person could take the keeper's place, walk the line, maintain the seal. I don't know how that would work. I don't know what it would cost. But I keep thinking about the bare circle and the stone and the carvings I can't read, and I keep thinking that I made this, and maybe I'm the only one who can unmake it. I don't know if I'm going to do it. I don't know if it's even possible. I'm not religious. I'm not the kind of man who walks circles in the woods. I'm a rancher. I run 42 head of beef cattle in Wexford County, Michigan, and I shoot coyotes when they come for my calves. That's who I am. But I have a daughter. I have a wife who loves me, even if she's not here right now, even if she's scared of her own bed. And I have a piece of land that my great-great-grandfather signed for in 1894, and a covenant in his name, and the spirits of the Nephilim walking it because of me. I'm going to drive out to the back 40 in a few minutes. I'm going to take my grandfather's Bible and his Book of Enoch and the Watching Journal and the deed with the claws on the back. I'm going to walk to the clearing with the stone. I'm going to stand at the edge of the bare circle, and I'm going to see if anybody is there waiting. I'm going to see if any of the others, the keepers from further out, the ones that called to my keeper across miles, the ones I heard answering each other on the night of November 15th, have come to the stone to see what happened. I'm going to ask if I can ask. I'm going to say I'm sorry. I'm going to say I didn't know. And then I'm going to step into the bare circle. I'm going to walk the line. I'm going to do it for an hour, or maybe a day, and see what happens. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. If you're hearing this, if you're somebody who came across this recording or this story, I want to leave you with a few things. The first is that the Book of Enoch is real. You can read it. It's online. It's not hidden. It's been there the whole time. On the edge of the canon, on the edge of what we're allowed to know about the world. Read it. Don't take my word for any of this. Read it for yourself. The second is that my great-great-grandfather, Otto Halverson, signed a deed in 1894 with the Order of St. Bartholomew, and I think there are other deeds out there like it. I think there are other pieces of land scattered across this country with similar clauses on the back. Pieces of land where the trees stay. Pieces of land where the keepers walk. If you live on a piece of land that's been in your family a long time, and there's a part of the property your father or your grandfather always said couldn't be touched, listen to that. Don't ask why, just listen. The reason is on the back of the deed if you know where to look. It might be in different words, but it's there. The third thing is the hardest. If you ever see a keeper, if you ever see one of them at the edge of your woods or standing in your yard at twilight, do not kill it. I know what they look like. I know they have a face that's wrong. I know they have a body that doesn't fit any animal you've ever seen. I know they come to your windows and they leave stones on your sills and they kill your livestock with their throats open and no blood on the ground. I know how it looks. I know what it makes you want to do. Don't do it. They're not the ones you should be afraid of. They're the ones holding back what you should be afraid of. They're not monsters. They're guards. They walk the line so the rest of us don't have to. They came down from the Watchers. They have mixed blood. They're not angels, and they're not men, and they're not animals. But they kept the covenant for thousands of years, and they're the only thing that keeps the bound spirits bound. If you see one, leave it be. Let it do its job. Don't bait it with a calf and shoot it from a stand at 1 a.m. Don't bury it in lime behind the barn. Don't think you've solved anything. The radio's playing some old country song now. Hank Williams, I think. My wife loves Hank Williams. She used to sing along to him when she did dishes. She doesn't sing anymore. Hasn't sung in a long time. I want her to sing again. I'm going to go now. I'm going to drive to the back 40. I'll leave this on the table. If I come back, I'll add to it. If I don't, somebody will find it eventually. My wife, probably. Or one of the neighbors when the cattle start dying without me there to feed them. Somebody will come. If somebody does come, and if you're the one reading this, I want to ask one thing. Don't go to the back 40. Don't look for the stone. Don't try to find me. Whatever's there, leave it there. The covenant was broken once by me, and I'm trying to fix it, and I don't know if I can. But if anybody else goes back there, anybody who isn't of the blood that signed the deed, I don't think they'll come out. I don't think it's safe. The dogman walked the line for over 100 years on my family's land. He kept the thing in the circle. He never hurt a person. He never broke a window. He never made the sound he was capable of making, the full sound, the howl, because the sound was the seal and the silence kept the lid on. He took the blood of my calves because that was what the covenant required, and I called him a monster, and I hunted him for 3 years, and I shot him through the chest while his head was bowed in some kind of prayer over the calf I had killed for him. I want to say one more thing about his face. The eye I lifted with my thumb after he was dead. The human eye in the dog's face. I've been thinking about that eye. I think about it more than anything. I think about the brown of it, the warmth of it, the way it looked the same as my grandfather's eyes in the old photograph that hangs in the hallway. My grandfather, Edwin Holverson, deacon at the Lutheran Church in Mesick for 40 years, who knew about the watchers, who knew about the keepers, who left me a note in the back of his Bible saying the trees stay and the keeper walks the line, who left me a journal he prayed I would one day read. I think about that for a long time, some nights. I think maybe the keepers know the families they walk for. I think maybe they recognize them. I think maybe the keeper who walked my land for 100 years knew the Halverson blood. Knew my grandfather, knew my father, knew me. And the morning I came home from the kill, the morning I took a shower and put on clean clothes and told my wife I loved her, the morning I thought I'd won, that morning was the morning I'd murdered something that knew me. I'm going now. The truck is loaded, the Bible is on the seat, the Book of Enoch is in the glove box, the watching journal is wrapped in oilcloth on the passenger floor. The deed is in my coat pocket next to Becca's drawing. I'm going to drive to the back 40, and I'm going to walk into the clearing, and I'm going to step into the bear circle, and I'm going to try. If you're out there somewhere reading this, if you're someone who's seen a tall shape in the woods at the edge of your land, if you've heard a moan in the trees that didn't sound like anything in any field guide, if you found a dead calf with her throat open and no blood on the ground, I want you to remember what I told you. They're guards. They're not the enemy. The enemy is what they're guarding against. And the enemy has been bound a long time, and the keepers are the only thing keeping the lid down. Be quiet on your land. Don't break the trees. Don't dig where you weren't meant to dig. If a keeper walks your line, let it walk. And if you ever feel the urge, in the middle of a long, cold night in November, to take a rifle out to the woods and finish off the thing that's been stalking your cattle for 3 years, sit with that urge for a while. Let it cool. Read the back of your deed. Look in the box your grandfather left you. Find out if there's a covenant before you decide to break it. That's all I have. The sun's coming up over the woodlot. I can see the light starting to come through the kitchen window. I can see the cairn of 3 stones on the windowsill above the sink, which wasn't there an hour ago, which the new thing has put there in the time I've been sitting here writing this. I'm going.